My dear people of God, in the latter part of Luke chapter 9, precisely from verse 52 following, we see Jesus setting out on a journey towards Jerusalem, towards the cross. And as they went along on the road, Jesus used the opportunity to teach many lessons about discipleship. So that journey was not just a physical one, it was also very spiritual. A time for the disciples to learn what real discipleship was all about. So if you would recall, 3 Sundays ago, Jesus taught them and he taught us that a disciple is one who behaves like the Good Samaritan. Then 2 Sundays ago, so that we will not think that discipleship is all about doing and acting, Jesus reminded us that a true disciple is one who sits at his feet like Mary and listens to him, so that his word forms, inform, reform, and transform the person's life. So discipleship is not just about acting or about doing. It is also being able to sit at the feet of Jesus and allow his words to shape us. Then last week, Jesus reminding us a disciple must ground his life in a life of prayer. In today's readings, Jesus is telling us that we must all adopt the correct posture towards wealth and possessions. That is the message for today. He is not condemning wealth, no. Else, in the responsorial psalm, you won't hear the psalmist praying, prosper the work of our hands for us, prosper the work of our hands. It wasn't mentioned only one, he prayed it twice. So our faith does not condemn wealth. Our faith does not even extol poverty, as if to say that poverty is a noble thing. What Jesus is teaching us today is that we should watch against all forms of greed and to think through whether we allow our wealth to possess us or we possess our wealth. So we are told that somebody in the crowd tells Jesus, "Jesus, tell my brother to share my inheritance with me." We all know what happens when it comes to sharing of inheritance. Sometimes families are torn apart because of property. But for Jesus, this was an opportunity to emphasize the underlying problem, what the issue really was. And here, the issue for Jesus was greed. If you read certain translations, it talks about avarice or covetousness. So greed is a more familiar word, but the rich word is avarice, which talks about that inordinate desire to always want to possess. The unquenchable thirst for worldly materials. And if you remember your Catholic catechism, you know you have 7 deadly sins. And I know you know all of them. Greed is listed as one of those deadly sins. Why would Jesus warn us against all forms of greed, all forms of avarice, all forms of covetousness. My dear friends, it is because, first of all, greed and the desire for wealth can choke the word of God in us. If you read the parable of the sower, remember we are told one or some of the seed fell among thorns. And when Jesus was explaining the parable, he said the seed that fell among thorns didn't bear fruit because worldly anxieties and the lure of wealth, of riches, choked the word of God. I am sure we know people who, when they had nothing, were very religious. But when God blessed them, they forgot the God who blessed them. And even if they still remember God, they don't put God where he belongs in their lives anymore. So because of greed, because of wealth, the word of God has been snuffed out. We also know what people do because of greed. Sometimes like eating with two hands at the same time. And I don't mean with fork and knife. You know what I mean. If you want to see how ugly greed is, think of the term in your local language and see how it is described, whether it is any nice term at all. At least when I did in my own native language, I saw that greed is not something you want near you. But friends, we live in a society where sometimes we see in visible terms how greedy people are and how greedy they can be. So Jesus says, let us all step back and look deeply into our hearts. And on the scale of 0 to 10, see where you place greed, that unquenchable thirst, wanting to have more and more and more. Why this is important is because one of the things that greed does to us is that it makes us place temporal goods over and above spiritual goods. And again, brothers and sisters, let us understand that the word of God is not condemning wealth. It's not condemning hard work. It's not condemning being an achiever. It's not condemning using sound business principles to achieve your targets. Jesus is talking about greed. Sometimes because of greed, friends become enemies. Because of greed, people bear false witnesses. Because of greed, they don't mind stepping on people's heads just to get to where they have to be. And then when they get there, now they want to repair broken relationships. So Jesus is saying that a disciple is one who makes the effort to evaluate his priorities or her priorities to the extent that the disciple can see where to place wealth and riches. So we are giving the parable of the rich fool. He had enough, and he was thinking of what he would do with his resources. And we saw all the things he spoke about: restructuring his barn, getting all the produce into the barn, and after that he would tell his soul, "My soul, rest, relax, you have enough to eat." And unfortunately for him, we are told that very night, God came and said, "You fool, tonight I am taking away your soul." What will happen to all the things you have hoarded. And then Jesus concludes the gospel by saying that thus will it be for all who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich in what matters to God. Brothers and sisters, in the second reading, Paul will tell the Colossians, put to death the greed that is idolatry. You know, when in Exodus, when the people made the golden calf and they worshiped the golden calf, they placed the golden calf over and above God. So anytime we are talking about idolatry in Catholic theology, it is like making that which is not God, God. Putting something over and above God. That is idolatry. So when Paul says that put to death greed and refers to greed as idolatry, Paul is challenging us that sometimes in our effort to be who we want to be, when we allow greed to possess our souls, it diminishes the quality of the worship we give to God. But step back and see what we hear in the first reading. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Even though here the author is painting a very pessimistic view of riches and wealth, he is also reminding us to really live for what truly matters, being rich in the eyes of God. I remember in the major seminary, one of our professors would say that, look, sometimes you even buy a very big and huge bed. In the night when you are asleep, open one eye and then see which part of the bed you occupy. So I guess as we think about greed and how we position wealth in our lives, let us all also reflect on what it means to be rich in the things that matters to God. What does it mean to be rich in the things that matter to God? Again, look at the parable. For this man, everything was I. He didn't even acknowledge God who blessed his land so that the land could produce what he is calling I. So being rich in the eyes of God always demands acknowledging God who is making you who you are. Acknowledging the God who blesses the work of your hands. The God who is prospering you. The God who favors you over and above other people. Acknowledging the power of that God. That is one of the surest ways of being rich in what matters to God. The other way also is to use what you have to glorify God by serving the needs of others. Because we are all stewards of God's blessing. See yourself as a stream, a tributary of God's blessings. That when God has given your stream water, it becomes fruitful when you use it to serve other people's needs. This man was ready to hoard everything for himself without wanting to give some away. Brothers and sisters, it is important to be rich in the things that matter to God. Because if you look at the gospel reading, the man's life took a downturn and for him it was a death. For us, it may not be death, but it could be a certain tragedy, something that can be very devastating. If you are not rich in what matters to God, how are you going to handle those moments? He was going to suffer eternal damnation because he wasn't rich in the things that matter to God. But when we encounter crisis, when our lives take a certain sudden downturn because of a news we receive or a personal experience we are going through, the only way we can survive is when we are rich in the things that matter to God. You know, one of the songs we keep singing, especially during Lent, is "I come to you once more, my God, no longer will I roam. For I have sought the wide world through and never found a home." One verse says, "Riches could bring me joy and power, but they were fair to see. Yet gold was but a sorry God to serve instead of you." So yes, riches are good, wealth is good, but they can also be spiritually dangerous. So how can you use them to be rich in the things that matter to God? Because if you are rich in what matters to God, then you have the graces and the blessings to always keep on prospering in a way that is pleasing to God. So as we step into another month, as we are praying that God will bless the work of our hands, God will prosper the work of our hands, let us remember that a true disciple must always know how to relate to the wealth and the riches of this world. And a true disciple must always watch against all forms, all kinds of greed. Because greed can always stand between us and our spiritual development.